On. All right, so today we are going to break into part one of the negotiation boot camp. And so this is an interesting class in regards of like thinking about the psychology of negotiating. And so it really comes down to understanding that, right? And like what goes on with four people in their minds when it comes to negotiating. So good morning, Kristen. So let me go ahead and turn the PowerPoint on. Slideshow, here we go. Okay. And for your class materials, we're going to go through pages 1 through 16. Okay. All right, 1 through 16. Oh, we got Roberta, a bunch of you guys jumping in today. Yay. Love when I have a good audience. Okay. So the purpose today, we want to gain an understanding of the different components that exist inside of a negotiation. So, and depending if we're dealing with a buyer or a seller, right, we need to understand what those feelings are that they're having. And so we want to enhance that for you, understand it. And then now you can apply that to your business to provide a great experience for the client, right? To have a smooth transaction. And the better we can be in the transaction, the more likely we're going to be to get referrals in the future, right? So after this class, we want you to understand the basic components or concepts, that exist inside of a negotiation, have a deeper awareness of the objectives, and then how to successfully navigate those in the different stages of the negotiation, and then a framework for negotiating buy sides and seller sides, because they are different. And then to grasp of the various tactics, right? So what are our tactics that exist, right? And I don't know if I like the word tactics, right? But what are the ways, what are the tools that we can navigate that, right? Because there are different ways to negotiate with people. And we've all had experiences where we've negotiated. If you go to Mexico, they negotiate differently in Mexico, right? People from Texas negotiate differently. And so there are different ways that we can deploy that help us to really get on the page with that person. We talk about, when we study the DISC personality styles, we talk about the golden rule versus the platinum rule. Golden rule says, do unto others as you would have done unto you. Well, the challenge with that, Jan, is that you and I are different. And so what your needs are might be different than mine. So the golden rule says to do unto others as they would have done unto them. And so that changes the experience, right, that they're having. Oh my goodness, more people jumping in. All right. So the result is that we want to increase the comfort and the success to maximize the value for your clients. Writing down attendance here. So the plan. So we're going to talk about the negotiation theory, to understand the building blocks. Okay. And then buyer negotiations, seller negotiations. And then next week, we'll talk about the different tactics, identifying commonly used tactics and how you can use them and apply them into situations. And so to have a plan, you guys, really does separate you from the pack, instead of just jumping in and trying to throw something against the wall and hoping it sticks. And so understanding people's personality styles, understanding where they are emotionally, because unless they're an investor, and even investors can be emotional, there's emotion involved. This is a big decision, right? People who are selling a home or people who are buying a home, it's a big decision, right? The biggest financial decision they'll make at this point in their life. And so we have to understand that and how to navigate that successfully so that they feel comfortable. They feel like they're in a safe space. Those of you who have jumped in a little after, I will send you the materials when we're done. So what is this course about? So the Negotiation Bootcamp teaches you the foundational framework for handling any negotiation. It covers every possibility, right? For the structure to your approach, from a buyer and a seller position, and then what are the tactics to be aware of, and then how to be more intentional and proactive in your approach to maximize the value for your clients. All right, so let's talk about negotiation theory. So key concepts, we have the different positions, we have the interests, right? Everybody's got an interest involved. So what is the interest? Usually the seller has a couple things, right? Money, time, right? They've got to be somewhere. They want to net a certain amount. And if they have a third thing, it's usually something that they request of you. And then what's the bottom line? How do we get to the bottom line? And then what's the zone of agreement? So, and we're going to dive into all of these here in the next couple slides. So position. So position is what are we negotiating? Okay. And then the position consists of the interest of the client. Again, usually sellers, money and time. Essentially, the positions are a series of stances that working to maximize the client's interests. Interests are the basic needs, right? What are the needs that need to be met? Again, seller, time and money. Buyers, usually, it's a need to buy a home, right? That they don't want to be homeless. Interests are the underlying reasons, the values or the motivations. And so sellers, again, motivation, why do they need to sell? What is their reason for selling? And then how much money, right? The values. Interests are typically not expressed, but will be the primary influencers for a client's position. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Let me go back. Trying to move you guys so I can see the rest of the screen. Shoot, I'm having technical issues. So they're not going to be expressed. So that's our job to figure out, right, where they are. What are they feeling? What are they thinking, right? Asking the right questions, going deeper with things. Tell me more about that, Val. When was the last time you sold a home or you bought a home? Tell me more about that, okay? So we need to identify that. It's our job to discover that, because they're not necessarily going to willingly express that information. Hold on, I need to move you guys back up here because I don't know what I did to my Zoom, but you're you're in a weird spot now. Okay, let me see if that works better. So the bottom line is that this is the minimum agreement the client is willing to accept. Have you ever had a seller say, "That's my bottom line"? You do this long enough, you're going to hear that, right? You're going to say, "That's my bottom line." I just had that with a buyer the other day, like negotiating, "That's my bottom line. That's the max I'll go," right? So that this is what they're willing to accept. And then beyond the bottom line is the client's walk away from the negotiation. Frank, Nate's retired business partner, used to say to never let a deal die on your desk, right? Negotiate until you put the thing together, right? And if you do this long enough, you're going to have a situation where it started off icky and now buyer and seller don't like each other, right? It happens, and those transactions are challenging because that's not the type of deal you want to put together. So understanding the negotiation concepts here will, I think, help to try to avoid those types of transactions that are difficult. So the zone of agreement is the overlap between the buyer and the seller's bottom lines. This is where a successful deal will fall. So I believe I have it up on a slide here. So your buyer's starting position, buyers what? They want to negotiate down, right? Sellers want to negotiate up, okay? And then the buyer's bottom line, what's the max that they're willing to pay or the max that they're willing to do? Then we have the seller's starting position, might be here, right? We might be, difference between what the buyer's thinking to begin with and where the seller's starting point is. And then the seller's bottom line. And then our zone of agreement is right here in the middle where everybody is happy. I have this deal closing next week up here, and the house was priced at $725, 2 days on the market, 3 days on the market. Gorgeous house. And we came in at 700. Seller countered at 720. We countered at 715. And now we're closing next week, right? So going back and forth in those negotiations. A year ago, we wouldn't have been doing that. Well, a year and a half ago, we wouldn't have been doing that. We probably would have been offering 750 on price at 725. That's just been hitting the market a couple of days. So the zone of agreement is that sweet spot where everybody's happy clams, and we know what their bottom line is from both sides, right? And we've met that agreement that everybody can move forward. Sometimes it's hard to get to this place though, right? Encountering back and forth. So fortunately, the listing agent on this particular deal was super cool. We just went back and forth verbally until we were able to strike a deal and then put it in writing. So so understanding these different positions here and getting to this point. And sometimes it's not about money, you guys. Sometimes it's about time. Sometimes it's about concessions. Sometimes it's about, staying in a home, there's different motivations and different factors that come into play for people that have emotions. There's sometimes a seller doesn't want to sell to an investor because they want someone to live in their home and be an owner occupant, right? So there are different things that come up in negotiations, and it's not always about the price of the house. So we have to keep that in mind, that sometimes things get caught in people's craw, and you have to dig in there and figure out what it is. I remember years ago, we were working with a lady, her name was Kelly, and she was just being a pill. Like, we were in a transaction, she's just being a pill. And this lady moved a lot, her poor husband. We probably sold her 10 houses over the course of the years we worked with her. And she was just being challenging, and there was really no reason for her to be challenging. And Nate said to her, I said, Kelly, I can't answer your prayers if I don't know what you're praying for. And I know that might sound offensive to some of you, but it really wasn't in the moment, because there was something that was eating at her. And to be honest, I can't even remember what it is now, but because it was so long ago, but she was being difficult, and there was no reason for her being difficult, but there was something stuck in her craw. And as soon as Nate gave her permission to be honest about it and said, I can't answer your prayers if I don't know what you're praying for, she was able to put her guard down, and we were able to solve what was eating at her. Okay. So you have to be willing to dig in there when someone's being unreasonable or they're being overly emotional, irrational. There's something else there, and you've got to dig in. Okay. And again, sometimes it's not about money. A lot of times it's not about money, to be frank. I mean, it is. So buyer starting position, buyer's bottom line, seller's starting position, seller's bottom line, but we are not in the zone of agreement, right? So that happens, right? Well, we just cannot come to terms. And so figuring out, can we put it together? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes there just isn't going to happen, right? And so we have to go on and move on to the next property. And sometimes it's okay to tell a buyer, like, maybe this isn't the house for you, Kim. Right? If the negotiation is not coming together the way it should, maybe it's not the right house. And when I've given people permission to move on from a property, they always end up finding something better that they're more happy with. And they thank me later and say, gee, Sarah, I'm so glad I didn't buy that house. This worked out so much better. Okay. So sometimes we just can't meet in that zone of agreement. All right. So the stages of a negotiation: preparation, doing your homework, vetting things out, right? I like to call, if it's my listing, I'm calling the lender to find out, how qualified is the buyer. You'd be surprised what a lender will tell me, even though they're not supposed to. So I have a form. If you guys want it, send me an email, because I might forget afterwards. I didn't sleep very good last night, so my brain's a little foggy today. So if you want it, I have a form that basically goes through and asks a series of questions from the lender. And, sometimes they'll push back on me and say, yeah, I can't tell you that. Great, that's fine, but at least I'm asking. I want to vet out, not only am I vetting out the buyer, I'm vetting out the lender, because if the lender sucks, then I know we're going to have a crappy transaction. So I want to know all of that. I'm going to call the buyer's agent. I want to know more information than what I need. Who are they? Right? How many deals have they done? Are they seasoned? Are they new? Give me a little bit more scoop about the buyer, not infringing on any fair housing violations, but just getting more information. So we want to prepare, right? I'll run cost sheets for the offer, because the seller is going to ask you what the bottom line is, right? So we want to have cost sheets so that they know what they're going to net. So that's preparation. We used 2 years ago, and I don't know if Nate's still doing it or not, but we used to have a form that went line by line through the contract and outline the contract, so we wouldn't miss things, because it does suck if you miss that a refrigerator conveys or they're asking for concessions, because if that happens and you miss it, guess who's paying for that? You are. And so going through line by line and really understanding what that contract says and what is that buyer asking for. So that's your preparation. Discovery, right? Kind of talked about that already. And then we're getting into our bargaining, our negotiation with them, and then closing for getting the deal put together. Let me just check my chat real quick here. Colleen, can you send me an email, please? That way I don't forget to send it to you. Thank you. And I'll make sure you guys get that. All right, so the stages of our negotiation. So the preparation stage focuses on gathering information, right? I just said that, gather all the information possible, because it's your job when you sit down across the table from that seller that you're able to tell them everything that you possibly can. If you have more than one offer, that becomes even more critical, because that's hard, you guys. It's hard to sit across the table from someone and tell them, I think you should take this offer, right? Because what if that offer doesn't go through? Been there, done that. And so it's important that you have all the information, so that when you sit down across from the seller, you're not telling them which offer to make or take. You're explaining it so that the both of you can make an informed, intelligent decision on which offer is going to hopefully get across the finish line. Because getting an offer is only one part of the equation. It's got to close in order for it to be considered a success, right? And then we want to develop our strategy on how to negotiate that contract and get the deal done. So information gathering identifies the client's interests, their resources, alternatives, and their targets. Okay. Alternatives, right? Alternatives might be, well, what are alternatives if they can't get financing, right? Or the appraisal, we might have an appraisal issue, concessions, buy downs, all those things are considered alternatives. So the stages of your negotiation, we want to develop a strategy that helps you better understand the negotiation points. These are prioritized and must-haves, nice to have, and trade-offs. Okay, your initial strategy should include refining your starting and secondary positions as well as your walkaway terms. So for the seller, must-haves, right? These are non-negotiables. Nice to have, right? Oh, that would be nice to have. And then the trade-offs, right? Well, we'll close on this day, but we need this from you. Or, you know, we'll give you post-possession. No, I'm not gonna say that. Take that back. Shannon wouldn't like me to say that. No post-possessions. But you understand where I'm going, right? We might trade off on something. It could even be furnishings. Like this deal I'm closing, we traded instead of repairs, the sellers gave us some furniture. That would be a trade-off, right? So in lieu of repairs, seller gave us, $1,000 worth of furniture that was in the house, or $600, whatever it was. So figuring out those trade-offs, right? But the must-haves, you really need to address these because those are non-negotiables from the seller's perspective. So your discovery stage shifts the focus to the counterpart's interest in what they value. The more facts that you can learn about the counterpart's motivation, the stronger your offer will be. Okay. So if you're on the buy side, call the listing agent, find out what the seller's plans are. Ask the selling agent, is there anything they need? Right. That was something we kind of got into during the pandemic market, right? Because, the seller's agent was so overwhelmed, right? Can I buy you a pizza? Bring them a cup of coffee, right? We don't want to bribe, but just ask, what does that agent need? Do they need help with something? Is there something you can do to make their life easier to get your offer accepted? All right.
Chip in here.
Say, yeah, go ahead, please.
It's Roberta.
Yes.
So in that crazy frenzy, I was finally successful in getting a buyer a house because I went to the listing agent's open house. And it sounds horrible, but I cornered her and I told her, I'm not going to leave until you tell me what the seller wants and needs. You've got to help me here because I've already written 20 offers for my buyer and I'm getting this house. Mm-hmm. And so we just kept having conversations. She kind of laughed at me and we went back and forth and back and forth. And I know it's a really long story, but the bottom line is I finally heard her say, she finally spilled the beans that on the 3 offers that they did have, one of the people wanted to fill in the pool and that the seller had built that pool and that was their favorite thing of the entire property. And I was like, oh, that's just so terrible. So I wrote up the offer. I wrote in the email that the most important thing to my client was the pool. That Huge. He loved it. He could see making memories there. He loved the design of it. He loved where it was located. He's already bought pool toys. I mean, I just went overboard. We ultimately, obviously, my buyer lives there now.
Right. That's huge. That's a great tactic. I wrote a personal note. It just happened to be a house in Sun City West that was occupied. And I knew the listing agent. She used to be one of our agents. And so that was an advantage. But I took a little note. They were having an open house. So I went back, I showed the house and I went back and dropped a note off to Mr. Healy and just said, thank you so much for letting us see your home. You've taken such great care of it. My clients really love it. And that's why we beat out another offer that was actually stronger just by doing that. And up until the closing day, that he was still gushing over the fact that I took the time to write them a personal note. And so I don't think I infringed on any fair housing stuff with that. I just said, thank you for the opportunity to see your beautiful home and thank you for considering our offer. And so, so those are little things that you can do, right? So we want to find out everything that you can, find out what the seller's needs are. Where's the seller moving to? Do they need a specific closing date? Do they need specific things, right? I've actually written offers that paid sellers concessions, right? To get offers accepted. Here's $1,000 towards the seller's concessions. You don't usually see that. You usually see it the other way around, right? But just try to be unique and try to think outside the box. Okay. So the more that you know, the stronger that your offer will be. So bargaining stage. So this begins the biggest opportunity to influence the outcome of the negotiation. The process typically consists of the offer, any counteroffers, concessions, and contingencies. I have found it really curious how many, I don't know if you guys have pulled the MLS this week, but really curious how many offers that are in the MLS right now that are active with contingency. It's a lot of houses that are under contract with contingencies. That is new for us in the recent years, right? Is having those contingency offers. So get good at that form because that contingency offer form is confusing. So ask questions and get good at using that form because I think we're going to see more and more of those contingency offers. So pay attention. So your attention should go towards your client's objectives and interests, where appropriate, concession plans can help bridge the gap towards a mutually agreed upon outcome. This is another thing that's new for us in the last 15 months, 18 months is concessions. I was running comps on my rental property in Surprise, and there was a house that had sold model match that had a $23,000 concession. What do you think that went towards, Kim? By buying the rate down, right? Buying the rate down of closing costs. And so get good with that. Understand what concessions are, understand how concessions work, because there's only so much that the buyer can get from a lender's perspective. So if you haven't done one, go ask questions and find out what that looks like from the lender's world, because there's only so much. And then also with the new construction stuff, I think I would be paying attention to what the builders are offering for concessions, because a lot of them are still doing, I saw one the other day, 4.99% fixed interest rate. And when rates are at 7, that's freaking huge, right? That is huge. That makes a big difference in someone's buying power. And so understanding what those concessions are, how do they work? Why are they important? Scripts and dialogues on how you can negotiate that stuff, not only with your sellers, but with your buyers. Jan, we talked about this yesterday in the gas program. You got a buyer that's on the fence because she's waiting for prices to come down. I talked to someone yesterday who's, I've been talking to her for a couple years now, and she said, I've been waiting for prices to come down and they're not. So I guess I should think about buying now. And so, right. This is a person she's a very smart with real estate. She's bought and sold many houses in her lifetime. And so she's quite smart with that. And she literally said that to me. I've been waiting for prices to come down and they're not. And so I don't know if she'll actually buy something. She's kind of a little bit different, we'll say, but understand those things. And how do I navigate that? How do I successfully navigate that? Because you're going to run into a seller who's going to say, I'm not paying closing costs. If a buyer can't buy my house with their own money, they're not buying it. And 9 times out of 10, when they say that, you put the offer in front of them, they're going to accept it, right? So when I talk about concessions, I'm talking about that when I'm listing the house, right? Because I would rather address the situation up front, Jan, and talk to you about it now before an offer comes in, because I don't want to blindside you. And then if an offer comes in that doesn't have concessions, then I get to put that money back in your pocket, and that makes everybody happy. But if I address it up front, and I actually will build concessions into my my cost estimate when I'm doing my cost sheet, I'll build them right in there so we can talk about it and they can see it in their net before we ever even get an offer. Right. So I'm addressing the issue up front, letting them know that this is a very common thing that's happening in our market. This is what you should expect. And then if we don't get an offer, great, that you get that money back in your pocket. Okay. So talk about it up front, understand what it is. So the closing stage. So this has a higher psychological or sociological impact on the results of the negotiation. So develop a plan to close the remaining gap together, either by exchanging concessions or exploring alternative trade-offs. So again, this house needed a little bit of work, about $1,000 worth of work, with some minor repairs, and they wanted to sell some furniture. The sellers were moving to Alaska, worked out great. We traded off, right? So again, sometimes it's not about money. We can find alternative ways to trade off. So we've actually even negotiated vehicles in transactions. Hey, I like that car in the garage. Can we buy it from you or negotiate that into the sale of the house, right? So there's a lot of things that can happen. So stages to the close. So identify the cues that can weaken your client's position in the final stages, such as eagerness to close, threats or warnings, or guilty about previous concessions. The agreement will be completed once the middle ground of the zone of agreement is reached. So eagerness to close, like anytime someone's tried to push me and is too aggressive, like that's a red flag to me, right? We don't want to give away, things that you shouldn't tell buyer or seller that weaken the position. Like for example, if the buyer's mom lives next door, you don't want to give that away, because now you've just weakened your buyer's negotiation position. Right. You don't want to, I don't know if you guys watch Modern Family, but, Phil's a realtor, and there's one episode where they're trying to sell an investment property, and, they're making the buyers look really eager, to buy the house. And so if we get overly excited, that can weaken your negotiation position, because now the seller knows, hey, this client really wants the house. I would also, side note, be careful when you're walking houses, what you're saying, because ring doorbells and there's cameras and things inside a home. So be careful what you're talking about when you're inside properties. Okay. Threats or warnings, we'll talk more about that when we get into tactics, and then guilty about previous concessions. So maybe they had an experience, prior, right, that they're bringing into the current situation. All right, so preparation. So information gathering, developing your strategy, identify the counterparts and counterparts interests. So what is the buyer looking for? And then bargaining, right? So we have our offer, we have any counter offers, we have concessions and any contingencies. And then the closing, maximize, I just made up a new word, maximizing and solidifying the value, right? What's the value for the buyer and the seller? All right, so let's dig into buyer negotiations. And so again, same thing, gather information, right? What is the buyer wanting to do? The buyer needs to be in on a certain time. Do they need certain concessions? You know, buyers are oftentimes very payment conscious. I think all of us are very payment conscious, and looking at what that looks like for them, prioritizing their interests, redefining their position, and then we want to clarify the bottom line. So gathering information. So here's an example script. What I would like each of you to do is complete this criteria sheet, which is available in one of the other classes, so we can build the vision of your perfect home. I'll step out for a moment and let you complete it. Just open the door when you're finished. How did that go? Do you see value in using a sheet like this? It's extremely important that we focus, because reacting in the marketplace without pre-established criteria is like going grocery shopping without a grocery list when you are hungry. Anybody done that before? Right? We end up buying too much stuff because we're hungry. And so another thing too is I don't want to set them up for disappointment, right? I have this lead that Brandy sent me that they have a house to sell in Glendale and then they're going to buy up here. And she was real hot, for a couple of days, like sending me properties. And I said, anything I show you today is probably not going to be available by the time you get your home sold. And so I don't want to set you up for disappointment. So focus on getting your home sold. And then when the time's right, we'll start looking for homes, right? And so it's important that we don't set people up for failure. So buyer criteria sheet it's a part of creating a McDonaldized process in your business, right? Making sure that you're asking the right questions, the same questions of buyers, and helping them understand what it is that they want and need in a home. Buyers are liars. We say that because a lot of times they really don't know. And especially if they're first-time home buyers. I find first-time home buyers and then people who are moving down in size, they really struggle, right? Because if you're coming from a 4,000 square foot house down to a 1,000 square foot house, that's a big transition. And so helping them understand what's important to them. There was a survey done of, is it Gen X? Is that the generation behind us now? Or is that right? Am I saying that right? Gen X? Yeah. So everyone's like, what? Okay. So millennials, brothers and sisters. Now I'm getting confused if I'm a Gen X or if that's the next gen. Anyway, the next generation of people coming into the marketplace, they were surveyed, and their big thing that they wanted was proximity to work. It was safety, and then proximity to work, and then proximity to family and friends. So helping buyers understand what's most important to them. And if they're first-time home buyers, this isn't going to be their forever home. So helping them understand what is the most important things that they need in that property. Okay. So having them fill out, and if there's more than one person involved in the transaction, they definitely need to make sure they're filling out a criteria sheet so that they can get on the same page. Because if it's a partner, partners, women tend to think, closet space is most important. Men want garage space, right? So we can have those different values there of what's important to us in homes. And so making sure that they get focused. I guess that was probably kind of a little sexist statement to make, so I take that back. So prioritizing the interests. So script. So since all of your needs are priority one, what I would like to do now is help you prioritize your wants. So wants are different than needs. Right? I need to be in this school district, or it used to be years ago that the fire department said you had to live in the city where you worked. I don't know if that's still the same, but that would be a need, right? If I work for the city of Phoenix, I got to live in the city of Phoenix. Okay. So helping them prioritize that. So what's second, what's third, what's fourth, what's fifth, and continuing down the line until we have all of their needs and wants prioritized. Because like a need for something versus a want, right? I want a pool, but that's not necessarily a need. Right? It's a want. I want a 3-car garage. Could you do a 2 with a RV gate? Right? So helping them understand that I want 4 bedrooms. Well, can you do 3 in a den or 3 in a loft? Okay. So now that we've identified your priorities, let's talk about where we should be in our pricing our offer. If they counter our offer, how would you ideally like to raise your secondary offer to? Okay. So just continuing to go a little bit deeper with that as far as the price. And sometimes, you got to run comps too, because if the house is priced right, you need to advise your client of that so that they're not going in and trying to lowball the seller and then getting disappointed. And you certainly don't want to go in and offend the seller out the gates, because if you do, it's just going to make for a really crappy transaction. So we have here the bottom line. So my goal is to keep our negotiation as close to your initial offer as possible, but we should discuss the limits of what you feel is appropriate for this home. What is the absolute maximum you would be willing to offer in order to secure the property? It's not in any of the materials, but one of my favorite scripts is the chocolate cake script. So, Jan, if you were to come to my house for a barbecue and I offered you a piece of cake, what would you say?
Thank you.
Oh, you would say thank you. You're supposed to say no. You're supposed to say no, thank you. I'm good. I don't want a piece of chocolate cake. But if I walked up to you and I had the chocolate cake on a pretty little plate with a fork and a napkin, and you could smell it, you could see it, your mouth's watering a little bit, would you take the cake? Yeah, you're going to eat the cake. You're going to at least have a bite. And so when we craft our offer, Jan, I want it to kind of be the same way. I want our offer to be so enticing that the seller just takes it and accepts it, just like you would take the chocolate cake if I handed it to you. Does that sound fair to you? Right. So that's a great script, because we've all been in that situation when we've been at a party where we decide we're wrestling or whether or not we want to have the chocolate cake. Right. And so if you put it like that in terms that people can understand, it's a brilliant script. And by the way, I want to script off with that. Thank you very much. At an event years ago. So it's one of my favorite scripts. Right. And it's a great script because it's very relatable. And so, and we can get a buyer to understand that and say, yeah, I want to make my offer so tantalizing that the seller just says, I'm going to take it. Okay. So there's a bonus script for you that's not in the materials today. All right, so next up here, discovery stage. So determine the seller's motivation, their interests. Want to ask questions, go deeper. Tell me more about that. When was the last time you bought or sold a home? Okay, you guys have heard me say it before, the word "oh." It's a great script. Comment on previous sales, right, of running comps. So we want to look at comparables to see what has sold in the past and checking that out. You need to run comps, because if you're going to if there's going to be appraisal, you need to know if you're going to have an appraisal issue, or be able to anticipate that. And that's on both buy and sell, right? Whoever you're representing, you need to be having those conversations. And you got to also look for trends that exist. Are there if you're listing a house and there's 3 out of 5 comps are asking for close with concessions, you're most likely going to get a buyer who's going to ask for concessions. So you need to be able to tell the seller that, and then inquire or suggest negotiating points to improve your client's offer. Okay. So now is when the rubber meets the road. So things to consider. So you want to run your CMA, have a range that exists inside the neighborhood, maybe for the comps, or even for your client. Like, where's their starting point? What's their secondary position? Would they negotiate? Can they negotiate? Right? And then timing. So timing is also another negotiating point. I think we may start seeing some more situations where sellers want to stay in homes until the property's closed. When I first started selling real estate, it was not uncommon to have a 24 to 48 hour post possession, because the seller didn't want to move out of their house until they had the funds in their bank account. This house I have closing up here, the seller said that to us last week. He said, we're leaving on this day. And I said, oh, we're closing on this day. I said, we're planning on getting the keys. He goes, well, you can have the keys as soon as I have my money. All right. So kind of old school thinking there, right? Of, you got to be out. We're closed, dude. So that's a conversation I got to have with the listing agent and make sure that the seller understands that when we close, they have to be out. Okay. But it was not uncommon. Nowadays, we don't want post possession because of the liability. But back, 20 years ago, it was very common to have that 24 to 48 hours. So don't be surprised if that starts to be something that we start to see again. And Shannon will have to advise us on how to do that safely. Concessions are key ingredients to improving your client's offer. So we have the price, we have terms. So this is your closing time, and then dates, timelines, inclusions or exclusions, and then any contingencies. And there are some contingencies, as you guys all know, appraisal, inspection. There's some that are already built in, but then we have to take into consideration other contingencies. I had a lady one time that was a buyer that she came to me, and we canceled on a deal because her down payment was coming from the sale of a racehorse. And she failed to disclose that to me. And so I said, well, you know, that you didn't disclose it. So technically the seller, we did get her earnest money, but I had to fight for it because that was something she failed to disclose. And it was a material fact that was contingent upon her being able to successfully close on the home. So you got to ask questions. You have down payments, right? There are some things that I want the lender to ask, right? So that the lender is the one doing that stuff, but there's still things you got to know, you got to understand. Which reminds me, I need to call someone, Steven. That got pre-qualified. So you got to understand those things. Even if you're not the one asking, you need to understand what they are so that when you're talking to people and you meet them, you understand, Val, like, what do you need to qualify? Or what are contingencies that exist? Okay, so being able to explain that. So the closing stage, so now the focus becomes maximizing the value. So always have a concession plan prepared to help push the negotiation across the line. And concessions too, you know, we talk about concessions from a buyer perspective, but what about from a seller's perspective? What can that buyer give to the seller to make that offer stronger as far as a concession? And it doesn't, again, does not always have to be money, you guys. Seller's negotiation. So, okay, I'm doing good on time. So gathering the information, again, same thing here. We want to gather every bit of detail that we possibly can, be a fact finder, an investigator, right? And then we want to prioritize those interests, redefining the position, and then clarifying the seller's bottom line. So this comes from another class in the seller conversion class, but asking listing questions before you ever go out on the appointment, out to the appointment. We have a series of things that you can ask as far as just, again, fact finding, you know, asking, you know, what's their time frame? You know, you know, what do they owe on the house? Digging in and finding out those things. And then getting into the pricing tools, running comps, you know, and I wouldn't use Zillow or Redfin as my tool for my comps, but I think you need to be looking at those things because your sellers are. Even though we know that they're based on an algorithm, your sellers are looking at those. And you don't want to, Kim, go on a listing appointment and be blindsided by that because the seller's gone on Zillow or Redfin and it has a different price than what you're suggesting. Okay. So again, I'm not going to necessarily use that for pricing. I might, right, if it's in line with what I'm thinking. But you want to run comps, and I think you need to look at tax record. You need to look at expireds and canceled because they do exist in our market today, and so you need to look at that because that tells us who's failed in the past with a pricing tactic. Okay, and then we want to call to confirm the appointment. If it's someone that you've never met, send a video text. Hey, it's Kim with Remax Professionals. I just want to put a face with a name. I'm looking forward to seeing you at 6 o'clock this evening. Right, that way they can put a face with the name, right? And then because you want to confirm the appointment, if there are two people involved in making the decision and one is unavailable, reschedule it for when they're both available. Okay, preparing the listing agreement. These days we have templates and stuff that we can prepare ahead of time, and then you can just email it right there. Used to be we'd fill out the paperwork ahead of time, and then, you know, like old school paperwork, and then have the paperwork there because it was a way to close as a closing technique. Get your mind in the right spot. Rehearse, right? Rehearse your scripts, rehearse the outcome of what you want to happen. We had an agent that worked for us, and he would actually go drive around the neighborhood. He would preview some houses if they were vacant, and then he'd find like a coffee shop or some place that was in the neighborhood, and he would sit there maybe an hour before the appointment and just get his mind, review his comps, review his plan, and just get the vibe of what it would feel like if you lived in that neighborhood. And I love that, right? Because, you know, that put him in kind of in the shoes of the seller, if you will. So whatever it looks like for you, your listing preparation mantras or rituals, whether that's a song or rehearsing your core values, just get your mindset in the right place that the outcome is what you desire. And you want to arrive on time. Okay, can't stress this enough. If you're going to be a minute late, you need to phone them and let them know. And then the same thing with being early. I was taught that if you're not 10 minutes early, you're late. And so I've spent a lot of time in my car because 10 minutes, you can make beds, people can take showers, you can eat a meal. There's a lot of stuff that can be done in 10 minutes. And so you don't want to necessarily be early because, you know, you want to just be respectful of people's time. So be on time. If it's something you struggle with, then, you know, set yourself an alarm or tell yourself different, you know, give yourself a different time. My ex-husband was chronically late by at least an hour. I never knew how he didn't get in trouble with his job, but it would really stress me out. So towards the end of our relationship, I started telling him if we needed to be somewhere at 2, I would tell him we needed to be there at 1. And so that was my way of managing the situation to control my stress. And we would arrive somewhat on time because sometimes he would go over that hour, but usually it helped. So if you struggle with that, find ways to deal with it because it's very professionally unattractive to be late. And all of you were on time today, so I don't think any of you guys have issue with that. Uncovering the needs. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very desirable and 1 being not desirable at all, what's one thing that has to happen to make the sale of your home a 10 for you? In other words, what would happen for you to consider the sale of your home a success? And then let them answer. And then the follow-up question is, why is that important to you? And then again, be quiet and let them answer. And then is there anything else that's important? Okay. Effective communication sometimes means there's silence. And it's okay. What is that saying, that he who speaks first loses? It's okay to have silence. It's also okay to practice the pause. So if you've ever coached with me, sometimes I'll do that. I'll just practice the pause. Let me get my thoughts right now. And so that's okay, right? Because it's okay to have that moment where we can just gather our thoughts, and don't be intimidated or uncomfortable with that because, okay, right? It's okay to gather your thoughts. And then you want to just be quiet and listen too, because that's important that we listen to what they have to say. And so many times we are listening to respond versus listening to actually actively listen. All right, I gotta see if I can move this. I'm having issues here. Okay, so refining our position. So now that we've identified our priorities, let's talk about where we should price your home. Before any offers come in, let's go through a series of potential counter offers so that we are prepared. So we have the seller starting position. Let me just click through these real quick. We have their bottom line, and then we have their secondary position. So this is what they would negotiate kind of here in the middle. So our goal is to maximize the value you get for selling your home. However, if we meet a capable buyer that satisfies our needs, do you have a lower limit? What do you feel would be, would you still feel like the sale of your home is a success, right? So that's another thing too you want to address with sellers, is that we don't want sellers to have remorse, feeling like they sold their house for too little, right? I feel like, we just rushed through it. We took the first offer and we could have got more, right? So you want to address that, because the reality is that if a buyer who's ready, willing, and able to pay you X for your house sees it today, then we should expect to get an offer versus them seeing it in the 60th day, right? And so making sure that we address seller's remorse, and we have scripts around that in the seller conversion class. So again, asking questions, identifying potential selling points that improve the value of the home. Some things are, like solar, for example. It's changed a little bit now, but 10 years ago, 5 years ago, solar was kind of a lifestyle choice, right? It wasn't something that everybody jumped on the bandwagon to have. Same thing with like a diving pool, for example. Diving pools actually have, in my opinion, devalue homes because they're just not they're more work, right? They take more maintenance, more everything, and they're just not popular like they used to be. And so looking at things that identify or improve or not, right? Because up here in this area, northern Arizona, having a pool is also not a selling feature, because you only get to use it for a little bit of time. And even in the summer months when the sun goes down, you're not getting in a pool, because it gets chilly enough that you're not getting in the pool. A hot tub, on the other hand, that's got some value, right? Because that can be used all the time. So let's see. So talking about the pricing, right? So interests and priorities, their secondary positions. We want to move into, again, we talked about that in that first slide, the zone of agreement, right? Where are we at with that? What's the sweet spot for the seller that makes them happy? So getting into the weeds of that and figuring out what is their bottom line, right? What is their bottom line? Because everybody has one, right? And sometimes we start here, but everybody has a bottom line. All right, so concessions, again, price, terms, dates, times, inclusions. Excuse me, stop it. Inclusions, exclusions, and contingencies. So hold on a second, I'm sorry. What were we barking at? Stop. She's getting old, so like she barks at the wind or shadows. So with these people on this deal I have closing, they're moving to Alaska. So to leave furniture that they didn't have to worry about trying to sell was a big benefit to them, right? And so it wasn't even necessarily about the price of the furniture or the concession we were asking for the repair. It was simply the convenience that the seller didn't have to worry about one more piece of furniture having to get rid of, because moving to Alaska is quite the undertaking, right? So I really want to stress that, you guys, again, it's not always about price. There's other things that we negotiate that become important to both buyer and seller.
Can I add something real quick, Sarah? On that
Absolutely.
previous slide about our job is to move them towards their, whatever it said, towards their point.
Bottom line.
So, bottom line. Sometimes clients don't share what that bottom line is. Sometimes they do. Irrespective of that, you know, you bring in an offer and they just say no. And I have done the frank thing pretty much is you're not leaving money on the table. You're not, you know, I'm going to help you navigate through this to get to those next terms and whatever that, or it's on the next slide. And I just say counter. Counter, you need to counter. This is what we're in this for. You're not going to get your full price today. We can show you the statistics on that. So I need you to counter, even if it's $1 less than what you're asking. I need you to counter and engage, because we don't know what what the buyer's upside is. So let's open the doors to communication. Now, what else can we negotiate about? And then I go through that other list about terms. Is there a better date? Can we leave the refrigerator? You know, what can we do? And I also, on those terms, you know, in reviewing the contract, and Kristen and I just did something similar, was how much can we give the buyer? What can we do? Are we okay with the home warranty? Are we okay with the closing date? Let's give them as much as we can give them that they asked for, so that I have a way to go back and negotiate and advocate on your behalf by telling them how wonderful we were that we gave them X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So those are all of my little tactics of getting my seller to the table instead of just being obstinate and saying no.
I agree.
others,
Yeah,
but-
that was a great point about appliances. I didn't even think about appliances. Because that's another thing you can negotiate that could be, you know, again, if it's a first time home buyer, getting appliances included is a good deal, right?
Right.
So love that. Okay. I think we're wrapping up here. Yep, that is it for today. So that's going to be our second part, is the tactics that we'll get into next week. And again, those of you who jumped in after I got started, I will send you the materials. And does everybody just want me to send the lender thing, the lender checklist? I'll just send it. Okay,
Sure.
cool. All right. That's all I have for you guys today. Next week we'll finish up this, but you guys need anything, reach out. What do we have Thursday? The social media class, which is in person. It is limited space. So if you guys haven't RSVP'd, it's at PF Chang's. They're doing social media reels and some other stuff. So it is limited. So definitely check out the RSVP on that. I think Amy sent something out too on it. So all right, you guys, if you need anything, reach out. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week for part 2. Let me just look at the chat real quick.
Thanks, Sarah.
Scott, that is the buyer conversion class. I think you've already taken it, the buyer conversion class?
Not sure.
Not yet. Okay. I'd go back and check your materials. Otherwise, you are welcome. Otherwise, you'll be taking the class. It'll be coming up here soon on the agenda.
Okay.
Okay. All right. You guys have a great day. Okay. I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.